Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to the TDR Traded Black podcast. I'm your host, Shad Dales. Doing it solo today, but we got some really important guests on, but lots to unpack, including the huge news from this morning in the psychedelic space, where MAPS announced they're going into a new rebranding. Why? Because they had a Series A oversubscribed financing round of $100 million. So what does this mean for the space? And could we see this industry heat up here in 2024? We're going to have Cody Shandraw coming up in a little bit to dive into what this announcement means. And as well, cannabis, MSOs, could we have a technical breakout? Saw a strong performance heading into the close here today. What does that mean going into next week? We'll touch on that briefly with our producer, Mitch. And most importantly, we've had a lot of feedback over the last couple of weeks pertaining to rescheduling. We've probably hinted about, yes, Q1, Q2, will it happen? Will it won't? Well, we're going to bring in a guest here today that knows it a little bit better than what we do. He's an attorney, and we're going to bring him now. He's the founder and managing partner of Mr. Cannabis Law, located down in Florida. Dustin Robinson joins us on the podcast. And good day, sir. How are things?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, appreciate you obviously checking in the time. And let's face it, and I'm sure you've heard this being an investor in this space, but ever since the HHS recommended the DEA about rescheduling, I think there's been a lot of speculation that this would happen within a 90-day window, which is so far from the truth. We want to have an attorney on that specializes in cannabis law that can basically walk through our viewers as to what this timeline is. But most importantly, I guess the most important question I want to ask off the top, do you believe the DEA will reschedule cannabis?
Yeah, I mean, my best guess is that the DEA we will reschedule. I mean, they have the full authority to do what they want. HHS has given them the recommendation. They have to rely on the findings of HHS from a scientific and medical perspective. But at the end of the day, it's up to the DEA. But I do think all arrows are pointing towards a yes. So I think we probably will see the DEA reschedule. I think the question is really more along when will this be? I know obviously a lot of stakeholders in the industry want it to be very soon. Hopefully the industry gets used to, whenever applications open up for a state and whenever they're awarded and people give their best guess, when are they going to award license? It always takes longer. And, there's all sorts of different aspects that go into it. And I don't think this will be much different. So I know the cannabis industry wants to see this happen quickly. But this process is quite an extensive process. It's not really something that generally just gets done over a few months. I mean, right now, the DEA is essentially assessing the HHS data and looking at some of their own information. And what they'll basically do is they'll create a proposed rule. Hopefully that proposed rule will include rescheduling cannabis to Schedule 3. Then there will be a notice and comment period of 60 days. And during this comment period, people could request hearings on record, which most likely will happen. And that could take quite a bit of time. And then at some point after that, there will be a final rule. And there's usually like a 30-day period before that final rule becomes effective. So I think it's a crapshoot. What we don't know is like how out in front of this the DEA has gotten.
That's a big question, right?
Yeah. I mean, they knew HHS was doing this. They were appointed to do this, to look into this by the president, right? So they knew this was happening. So the DA got in front of it and has been talking about it for a while and kind of expected it's possible it happens sooner. But I think more than likely it's going to be happening after the 2024 election, unfortunately. But you really never know. I don't have any inside information with the DEA, just knowing how long some of these things sometimes take.
Wow. So you think rescheduling will take place after the election?
And I don't think that's because anyone necessarily wants that to happen. I don't think it's like purposeful delaying. It's just a process that they need to go through. And certainly possible they come at least out with the proposed rule prior to the 2024 election. But at what time will we get that final rule and that final rule becoming effective? I would think it's going to be sometime after the 2024 election.
Wow. So what would you say, I guess, are the next key steps? You've outlined a couple of things, but the DEA is reviewing right now, as you mentioned. But could we see an announcement like at any given time? But by all means, it's not official, then there's the 60-day window to review for comments, correct?
Yeah, then the next step is really the proposed rule. So, hopefully we could get it any day now. I'd be surprised if it happened in this first quarter. I'd probably be even surprised if it happened in the second quarter. Certainly possible. But really, the next step would be getting that proposed rule from the DEA, and that's when that notice and comment period really happens. And the notice and comment period is really where the public could get involved. So, if you're someone who's passionate about this topic and wants to provide feedback, that will essentially be the time where the public is able to opine and give their own advice to the DEA.
Yeah. Happy Friday afternoon to all of our viewers logging on. This is the TDR Trade of Black podcast. I'm your host, Shad Dales, checking in today with Mr. Cannabis Law, Dustin Robinson, that's walking us through all the necessary steps. Coming up in about 10 minutes, we're going to have Cody Shandraw on from Ambria Capital to talk about the big announcement related to MAPS this morning. But our next question I wanted to ask, could you explain whether rescheduling would make the sale of marijuana state-authorized cannabis federally legal? And does the distinction between medical and recreational marijuana companies have any impact on legality? That's a question that you've outlined on your website.
Yeah, so the answer to that is no and no. So basically, this rescheduling does not make these state-authorized marijuana companies federally legal. Still federally illegal. A compound that is Schedule 3 means that it could be prescribed by doctors. In order for a drug to be prescribed by doctors, it has to be FDA approved.
Right.
These state-authorized marijuana companies are not selling FDA-approved pharmaceutical compounds. So still the sale from these state-authorized medical marijuana companies will be federally illegal. Doesn't matter if they're medical, recreational, or whatever it might be. Those sales will still be treated as federally illegal.
Yeah. Well, I think, the interesting part, related to this is like, do we see, yes, rescheduling, you're saying it's going to happen after the election, but like what happens to 280E? Like, once this is rescheduling comes into play, a lot of people think that 280E will go away overnight. What's the whole process involved in that?
Yeah, so there's so many different people talking about the implications of this rescheduling. It really doesn't change a whole lot other than this 280E thing. It's 280E and a little bit on the research side, but we could get into that. The single largest impact of rescheduling is that 280E would no longer impact state authorized businesses. And for those of you that don't know, 280E is a tax provision that only allows the state authorized marijuana companies to deduct cost of goods sold. So they have a very high effective tax rate, makes it very hard for these MSOs to be cash flow positive. So this puts a tremendous amount of cash back in their pockets. So 280E explicitly only applies to Schedule 1 and Schedule 2. So as soon as this gets rescheduled, automatically, when it becomes a Schedule 3 compound, 280E by its very language no longer applies. That is a huge victory for the industry. It's a huge victory for state authorized marijuana companies, huge victory for MSOs. And I think it's going to be the reason why we could potentially see a lot more investment capital coming into the industry.
Yeah, of course. You being an attorney in this space, like, are you having conversations that make you think this is going to be, not sooner, but rather later?
No, look, everyone I talk to in the industry is like, I think this is happening. I heard people saying 6 months back in August when, the recommendation was made. It seems like 6 months is like the number every time I talk to someone, it's still 6 months. So everyone in the industry I've talked to has been quite positive that it's gonna happen pretty soon. And look, I really hope that it does. It's purely speculation that I think it's going to take longer. Generally, these types of things, when you have a federal agency doing rulemaking with comment periods, and then needing to come out with the final rule and making an effective date sometime period after that, usually it does take sometimes years.
Yeah.
Even. I don't think this will take years. I don't think this is going to be something that we're looking at, 2 years from now. But I certainly think it's very, very possible that it goes beyond the 2024 election.
Another big question, I think, if and when this does happen, is that when does the big money start to come in? And a lot of the feedback that we provided our listeners is that we don't think that institutions will jump in right away, that they will actually look for federal legalization first. Do you agree with that? Or do you think that the big money, if rescheduling does happen, comes in sooner rather than later, knowing that you're a big investor in this space?
Yeah, so in addition to my law firm, I have my investment fund, and we've invested across psychedelics, and we've done some cannabis stuff as well. And the reality is, the big institutional capital hasn't come in because most of them have some sort of vice clauses, or at the very least, they just can't invest into federally illegal businesses. And like I mentioned earlier in the show, it is going to stay federally illegal when it goes Schedule 3. So it's still federally legal. So those guys who couldn't invest because it was federally legal will still not be able to invest for that same reason, even after it reschedules. Now, we probably won't see that institutional capital, but I do think we will see some of the smaller size investors really getting more involved. The bottom line is this puts more cash overnight. This puts tens of millions of dollars of cash right back in the pockets of MSOs. So it actually just makes them more valuable. So I think on speculation, you're going to see some investors trying to get in and hit this valuation bump before it actually comes.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to see how this will play out, because I think, for the Dems, they want to win, and this has nothing to do with politicians. This is a DEA agency, but I would think more than anything related to, and I know it's another topic regarding to safer banking, what kind of movement we'll see leading into the election. But I found that interesting. I haven't heard that yet, where someone actually believes that rescheduling will take place after the election. I keep hearing end of Q1, Q2. But more importantly, I wanted to have obviously an attorney on just to kind of walk us through some of the key steps and timelines that are going to be required.
Absolutely. Yeah. Look, I once again, I hope I'm wrong. I hope the whole cannabis industry, I tell you, I've been right way too many times, especially, when states legalize, when's the legislation going to come out? When are they going to finish the rules? When are they going to lapse their applications? When are the application winners going to be? Right now, I applied in Florida for a marijuana license, and people were saying that it was going to be announced, the winners of the last Florida round, in like October. And I was like, I think we're going to have to wait until potentially March 2024. And here we are, January 2024. Florida still hasn't announced the winners. And unfortunately, I think we're probably going to have to wait another couple months.
Yeah. How do you think that's going to play out? I think that'll get on the ballot as far as adult use.
Yes, I actually feel very confident adult use. The Florida Supreme Court needs to rule by April 1st. I think they will rule in favor of the language. They'll approve the language. It'll go on the ballot. Right now, all the polling is showing that over 70% of Floridians support this. We only need 60%. So I think the Florida Supreme Court will approve it. I think the voters will vote for it. So I think Florida will be the next state to basically approve recreational marijuana.
Matt Carnes writes, when would the clock stop on 280E? Would it happen before the final ruling, after all the hearings, etc.? It's a question he asked.
It'll be interesting to see how things play out. First off, 280, the day it becomes rescheduled, goes to Schedule 3, is when the language of 280E no longer applies. Now, whether or not people are going to play games and try to get, there's been a lot of MSOs that have not been paying taxes based on 280E, right? They haven't been calculating 280E. There's some challenges going on in court around 280E. So there's all sorts of issues. So whether people will look to retroactively apply this will be an interesting thing to watch. But my best guess is that it will not be retroactively applied. So it will not apply until the date marijuana is rescheduled to Schedule 3. At that point, any business operations thereafter, it would not apply to.
Really? Wow. Well,
yeah. So there's a lot of cannabis companies that are not paying their full tax bill, right? And some of them are late on filing their taxes. But I would be very surprised if they did something retroactively where they said, okay, on your 2021 tax return, you could calculate your taxable position based on 280E not applying. That's I think very unlikely.
Yeah, makes sense. I know that in addition to cannabis, you're also a big investor in psychedelics. And I want to bring in our next guest. He is the managing partner of Ambria Capital and also the president of Healing Realty Trust, Cody Shandraw, friend of the podcast. Bring him on up, Mitch. Happy Friday, sir. Good to see you. Look at you.
It's good to see you, boys.
Look at you, Florida boys, all tanned up, looking all like I'm pale. I'm struggling.
Weather's beautiful out here.
Gotta come down here. It was I was recording with our good friend Dan Carcillo, dude.
How'd that go, brother?
a jacket and pants. I'm like, dude, what are we in Canada right now? What are we doing?
So here you are, you're hosting podcasts now, president of one company, managing partner of another. You're flying in fighter jets. We got 10 minutes of your time. But wow, I know, Dustin, you're, like I said off the top, that you're a big investor in the psychedelic space. But Cody, wanted to have you on. What an announcement this morning. I think a lot of people were hoping for this announcement for a number of months. But $100 million MAPS, they rebrand into, hopefully I'm pronouncing this correctly, is it Lykos Therapeutics or Lykos?
Lykos.
Is it Lykos?
Yep.
But what was your take on that announcement today? It's going to be big for the industry, needless to say.
Dustin, go ahead. I'll let you start us off.
You're gonna let me go first. No, look, I mean, we're investors in MAPS. We invested in the SPV, which was a rev share, which we were actually, a lot of people don't know this, but we were able to convert it into equity upon this round raising. So we've been working with MAPS for quite some time, and keeping very close track of this round of capital. We knew they had to raise this capital to kind of take it to the next step.
Yeah.
Would we do? I think the valuation was, I think, fair. I don't think they say anything publicly, but it's probably not where they wanted to end up. But at the end of the day, I think in this market, being able to get $100 million is extremely important. But I also think it's important for people to understand that this is just the beginning of the capital that will be required. They will need to raise quite a bit more after FDA approval. So it's not like they are fully financed for the next 5 years. That's very much not the case. They're still going to have to attract a lot of capital, but I think it's great. As far as the name change, on the one hand, it's unfortunate because I think MAPS has built such brand loyalty. I mean, they are just such an incredible organization, and I don't have any inside information as to why they rebranded, but I'm guessing it has something to do with regulatory. At the end of the day, MAPS, the nonprofit, is really all about pushing the envelope. I mean, they have this conference of psychedelics. It's kind of, if you've gone to a psychedelic conference, it's not quite like a pharmaceutical conference. In fact, most pharmaceutical companies wouldn't come close to it just because it's, there's some stuff going on there. And so I think it was probably important for them, as they're getting FDA approval, to really separate themselves, not create any confusion. You got MAPS, the nonprofit, pushing the envelope, advocating for the industry. And now you have this separate entity that's, abiding by all the FDA and DEA regulations.
Yeah. Cody, fire away.
So I think you nailed the name change right on the head. My understanding was that the association with maybe some of the, extracurriculars was probably hurting the company from that standpoint.
I'm sure.
Yeah. So listen, and obviously separating the name of the nonprofit from the actual company that is now a pharmaceutical company needed to be done. I actually think it was probably too late. I agree with Dustin wholeheartedly that, it's 30 years of brand recognition. I mean, that's a tough pill to swallow, but I don't think anybody at the end of the day is going to give a shit who's selling the drug, right? The name means absolutely nothing. It's the 71% of participants that have achieved remission. That's what's going to matter. Listen, I think that all three of us know very well the last 24 months has not been friendly to anybody operating or investing inside of the space. So this is hopefully the tide coming back in that is going to lift all boats. So while this has been a monumental moment for MAPS as a whole for the industry, I think that this is even a larger achievement, if I'm being completely honest.
So you believe that this is a turning point for the space, is what you're thinking?
I do. I still think we're going to see continued consolidation. You've seen the Beckley and Atai partnership. I would not be surprised if at some, obviously Dustin and I are both shareholders in both of those companies. I think that we're going to see even larger announcements coming over the next several months from some of these companies continue to consolidate. And listen, at the end of the day, we're still in one of the toughest markets. You look at, the Dow or the NASDAQ, that doesn't really tell the story of the small caps, right? So I think that.
Do you think the small cap space will have a resurgence this year?
I don't know. It's
too early.
It's too early to tell, man. I've talked to a lot of CEOs the last couple of weeks, and it's still, do or die for a lot of these guys.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to continue to be tough. But the good news from that is listen, with the decreased valuations, the opportunity for investments right now on the strong companies, could be generational type of opportunities where you get into some of these things, especially the guys that have, world-class teams or assets. I mean, you look at right now today, and you look at that Otsuka and that Mindset deal, that might have been the greatest acquisition in pharma history for the amount of intellectual property they got for what they acquired that for.
Yeah.
I mean, so I guess it just depends. Everything's perspective, right? It just depends on how you're looking at it.
Can you guys maybe give me an update or just outline, like the lead investor was it's a global organization called Helena, which is a global problem-solving organization investor. They're backed by some pretty big heavyweights from research that I've done. But maybe, Dustin, if you could touch on who they are, and feel free to elaborate based off of his feedback, Cody.
Yeah, I mean, we did a couple calls with them. They signed their term sheet quite some time ago as being the lead investor, and I know they've been very involved. And we briefly talked with them. I don't really know much about them. They're not generally, from what I understand, they're not generally biotech type investors, but they do invest in very impactful stuff outside of biotech, and certainly this falls within that category. Like Cody was referencing, the trials where over 70% of the participants were no longer clinically diagnosed with PTSD in MAPS' phase 3 trials. I mean, this really has the potential to be extremely impactful. It works. I think I read an article where they were quoted basically just saying, like, it works. Like, we don't need to be pharma guys to understand, like, there's a lot of people suffering with PTSD, and based on this clinical trial data, it works.
Yeah.
Right. And there's decades of history of these compounds working as well. So I think they were kind of took like a don't overthink it approach. It's like, there's a lot of people suffering. This stuff works. All that's needed is capital right now to get this into the hands of the people that are suffering, including veterans, which both sides of the aisle could get behind. So beyond that, I don't have much information related to them, other than I know that they were very involved and have been super helpful. And, one thing MAPS was very particular on is finding investors that were mission aligned, which is tricky. It's a very tricky thing. On the one hand, you got to make profit. On the other hand, you're still a public benefit corp, right? And you're still trying to move things forward in the right way. So I'm assuming behind the scenes, those conversations that MAPS had with them, being that they selected them as their lead investor, I would assume that they are very mission aligned.
Yeah. Do you think it's a foregone conclusion, Cody, that indeed the FDA does approve MAPS' MDMA protocol?
I do. I mean, listen, it was already granted breakthrough therapy designation. So, I mean, that was really the main thing. The next closest drug is a drug called Paxil, Paxil. That's an 11% success rate. So when you look at that, what's currently being prescribed, and you look at what this is, I mean, I think it's, very easy to see the reason why this story resonates with such a large audience, whether they are biotech investors, whether they are impact funds. Like, that's one of the interesting things. Like Dustin said, these aren't pharma guys.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? These are impact investors. And I think that's one of the things you're going to kind of see get real blurry. When you kind of look, I mean, over the last couple of years, I've had so many portfolio companies that were trying to do so much, whether it was drug development or clinic development or technology, and one company's trying to do all these things, and then they couldn't find investors because investors are normally super focused on their area of expertise. I think that this is going to be one of those types of stories that you're going to see a lot of different types of funds, investors, high net worth individuals, that are going to get behind this and actually back this. I think it's going to be a unique story. And, you talk about the total addressable market of MDMA and PTSD, right? 13 million people on average every year in the United States alone have a PTSD diagnosis. Think about that, 13 million people. And, if we're all being very frank, do you see this world becoming a better place?
Yeah, exactly.
I think that those numbers are probably going to continue to climb, as unfortunate as that is.
Yeah.
Dustin made a really interesting point too, man. I think about how I can say this as PC as possible. The MAPS deal made me very nervous. I actually didn't. I think I was one of the only psychedelic funds not to participate in that original deal Dustin was talking about.
Why did it make you nervous?
Just because, listen, limited patent exclusivity, right? I mean, 6 years on the patent window. Obviously, if some additional announcements are made here over the next year or two that may provide some additional IP protection. The infrastructure, I mean, obviously, listen, Dustin is also on our advisory board for Healing Realty Trust. So one of the reasons why we started the company, man, when I looked at this and you looked at a company as powerful as Johnson & Johnson is, and the uphill battle they faced for Spravato to become, I mean, dude, there were less than 100 clinics in the country offering Spravato when that went live. Think about that. And just now,
when did it go live again?
2019.
Was there only 100 clinics? What is there now?
20, almost 2,700, like 2,680, I think.
Where do you see that growing to if MAPS gets their protocol approved? What do we need it to grow to?
Listen, I think people are going to be very surprised. When we started HRT, I thought it was going to be the ketamine clinics that were the tip of the spear for this. I think less than 5% of the ketamine clinics are going to offer this.
Why?
The facilities are just not. You have to remember, ketamine is a short duration drug.
Yeah.
MDMA, much longer. You're going to be inside those rooms for 6, 8, maybe even 10 hours in some cases.
Yeah.
The ketamine clinics, there's a misconception. Ketamine clinics are built, and we've obviously seen a lot of them fail. That is a volume business.
Yeah.
That is not something.
It's also a different staffing and systems infrastructure to accept insurance. So companies that are accepting Spravato right now, they have whole teams that are set up, teams and systems to basically get insurance reimbursement for Spravato. Those companies it'll be easier for them to, bring in MDMA. But if you don't have the physical infrastructure, but if you don't have the staffing and system infrastructure for insurance reimbursement and running this like an on-label FDA-approved insurance-backed prescription drug, it's just going to be a little bit challenging for them to convert over.
Yeah. So I think most people are going to be surprised that the first movers of this. We talked to a behavioral health company based in the Midwest, locations all across the country. 17% of their patients have a PTSD diagnosis.
17%.
Now, you think about a company like that has dozens of locations spread across the United States, has inpatient stay where people are staying 30, 60, 90, 120 days. That is, in my opinion, what this is going to look like on the rollout. But why we didn't invest is looking at the amount of infrastructure that is needed to actually commercialize this and the staffing, the training, all of those things. I looked at that 6-year window and I just didn't. And now obviously I'm sitting here and kicking myself. I wish I would have joined the rest of the crew and invested in that. But I at the time, it just looked like, it was going to take ants to move a mountain. I didn't see it, in that time window.
I also think it's important to know, like the saying, pioneers get the arrows, settlers get the land. I mean, MAPS is the pioneers. They have to create this whole infrastructure. I mean, the reason we invested is, yes, we expect a return on our investment, but also we also invested in the settlers that are coming in behind them that will be the beneficiaries of the barriers that they knocked down. So I think, it was important for us to support them, but MAPS still has a really, really long road ahead. I mean, if you think about it, MAPS has been working on what they've been working on for 3 decades, right? Yep. So they knocked down all these barriers, and there's some, psychedelic companies that have been around for 5 years that are really the beneficiaries of all the work that MAPS has done. And that's just going to continue. MAPS is going to have to take longer than what the people after them come in. They're not going to have to take as long as MAPS will take or spend as much money.
It's an interesting point. So now we talked about the infrastructure. Think about this, okay? So MAPS is going to spend years getting this rolled out. Compass is going to have a drug approved right after. All this infrastructure is going to be built the rooms, the facilities, the training, the insurance, all of that's going to be in place. In my opinion, you look at the wave after MDMA, that's when it's going to get really, really interesting, because you're going to be able to forecast almost immediately what revenue projections are for companies like that.
Does MAPS in some ways, if they have the actual protocol, it's approved by the FDA, do they branch out of MDMA, become like the vehicle for a lot of these drugs to become commercialized eventually, or am I like maybe reading into that a little bit too much?
I think there's an opportunity if MAPS was more profit aligned, or
Yeah.
if a big pharma company came in and wrote a check for $800 million in this next round, and kind of took control of them, or even if none of those things happen. I think there is an opportunity for MAPS to kind of take in some of these other assets that are struggling. They clearly have the infrastructure and the support. They're going to have the infrastructure to commercialize these, even though right now they don't, but they're going to be building this infrastructure. So I think that there, certainly is an opportunity for MAPS to, and look, MAPS has a lot of other interesting research going on. They got MDMA for couples going on. They've got a cannabis trial that I think is pretty interesting around pain. So they already have multiple trials. The big challenge is having enough cash. Like, there's so many things MAPS could do, but they're trying to say like hyper focused on just
as they should.
As they should. Hyper focus. If they could get another, $1 billion in the coffer, then they could start focusing on some other areas. But right now they got to stay hyper focused.
You think they'll get it?
The money, like the additional money?
Yeah, $1 billion.
I think eventually I think they will get the money that they need to execute on their plan. I think, Rick has really held on as tight as he can to keep this as like fully owned by the nonprofit and not give up equity.
Those days are done.
Yeah, those days are done.
Whatever's going through his head, 36, 37 years, MAPS brand gone. Well, I want to say gone.
I think he's happy. I think his fight has been to get, this has never been about Rick. It's never been about MAPS. It's about getting these medicines in the hands of patients. And he's going to do what is required to get that done. He's going to try to do it as best he can and ethical and keep as much control as possible. But at some point, the big pharma companies might be stepping in. And, Rick and the MAPS team are, they're going to have to make some tough decisions.
Yeah. Well, as that old 90s movie, was it If You Choose Wisely, when it comes to some of these companies, it's all systems go with this money raised. Full disclosure, the client of ours, but Numinous Wellness, when it comes to their network of training physicians, this is probably like, I don't want to say a wake-up call, but this is going to be like full force. They've got to train and train fast with a lot of this money that's coming in now, right? I would assume, Cody.
Listen, I think that Numinous is maybe one, we talked, that's one half of the thing that we talked about, right? Was the human capital, the people that need to be trained for this.
Yeah.
I think that story gets very, very interesting very quickly. And the question becomes scalability. How fast does it scale? How many new physicians, doctors, therapists can they train? And then listen, you also have a lot of the old guard. When we first started talking to some of our tenants, that were looking at adding these new therapies onto their practice, you got to remember the average age of a psychiatrist in this country is 57 years old. You have somebody that has for their whole entire life seen this as a bad drug, a party drug.
Yeah.
That's going to be another really interesting kind of piece of the puzzle that nobody's talking about is, even if the doctor pool is there, let's say the medicine's approved, let's say the infrastructure is built, how many of these legacy type of guys are going to make that switch and start offering those services to their patients? The younger, I've been very lucky to be able to travel across the world the last couple of years. The young physicians that are just getting
on board.
They love, listen, this is, think about being a physician when SSRIs started getting prescribed. It's a brand new, opportunity for them that they've never had before. So they're excited. But the question becomes, are they going to have the amount of capital to be able to invest this and bring these businesses online?
My neighbor, psychiatrist, I visit him 4 or 5 times a day. Just kidding. But anyways, he's doesn't know much about the psychedelic space. Got a son going to school, wants to be a psychiatrist, all over this industry right now.
Yeah.
You have no idea how many investors I meet that don't know anything about psychedelics, but their child is going to psychiatry school and wants to be a psychedelic assisted therapist, and they're bringing their child to our meetings to provide input. And the amount of calls I get from young doctors that want to get involved is just, it's insane. There's so many the medical industry, the younger generation, to Cody's point, is very, very, very interested in getting involved. And there's no doubt this will be taught at big universities and be a part of the curriculum in the future. And hopefully that's very soon, so that we could, train the psychiatrists and therapists of tomorrow for psychedelic therapy.
One of the bigger universities that did some of those studies might be announcing a new program related to that soon, right?
I don't know. I've heard a lot of rumors about a lot of universities have said they're going to have some sort of program, but we'll see. I don't know.
It's going to be interesting fall classes. There might be some announcements coming from some of those larger universities.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You got your ear to the ground, so that's why we have you on. But we will probably stay and watch that closely. Psychedelics, and we've talked about just the optimism that's building in both these verticals going into this year. But rescheduling, obviously is top of mind in the cannabis space. And then, the first week of January, we're seeing an announcement like this. This is, I don't want to say long overdue, but I think it was, anticipating that we would get this announcement. We finally do, which would, I think, is going to pave a way for a good opportunity for a select few companies heading into 2024. And eventually, I would assume MAPS will go eventually. Is the idea to go public, like on New York or NASDAQ at some point? Do you guys know? Or you can't really comment?
I don't know what I could say. I mean, I've had a lot of discussions, but I wouldn't be. I think let's just say all options, I think, are on the table for MAPS. And look, 2023 was a really, really tough year, like Cody referenced earlier. So look, I surely hope that this early in the year good news is an indicator for this year getting better, because the macro, the economy really needs it in general, but these industries, cannabis and psychedelics, they desperately need a good year moving forward.
Yeah. All right, gents, I'll let you guys run. Go enjoy that Florida sun, and let's keep in touch.
Love you both.
All right. Thanks, Cody. Thanks, Dustin. Well, that was interesting, wasn't it, Mitch?
Heck yeah. I don't know about you guys, but I'm still tuned in, man. I'm ready to hear more.
Before we go, I did want to touch on a few things. MSOs, I know you brought up that chart before we went live, but want to bring that up real quick. But there is a couple of things that you're showing to me if you want to maximize that. But could we see a technical breakout? But yeah, it was up. What was it, 6% on the day? I don't have the stats in front of me.
Yeah, 6%, a little bit over 6% now, showing up like close to 8% now. But you guys can see this on the daily. We have a nice little breakout above this trend line. And whenever you get a breakout above trend line, the number one thing you want is the next day to come close to that trend line, but not close below that trend line, because that negates the breakout above the trend line. Today, we get that specific move. Today, we open at 729, go down to 709, look like you're going to break $7 and bounce right off of that line, right back to the top end on the close. Close coming in here at 801 and a high on the day of 826. Now you're starting to break above these levels and starting to go back towards prior resistance. Next level to watch, I would say, is around this October 2nd level, where you got the 820 high. As you can see today, that kind of ran right into that stop there. If we can get through there, next stop, we can start working our way to 9. And we all know what this candle is. That was back in September 15th when things were looking good.
Seriously.
So we are looking great right now in the case. And one of the things to help is the increase of volume that's come into the space. If we just think about this at the bottom, right? This is volume. And you look back and you see what has happened. Well, if you add up all that volume, it might just be more than 2 or 3 years worth of volume.
Yeah. I'm just looking right now at some of the big movers today. Air Wellness up almost 15%. You bring up that chart real quick?
Yeah. Look at that. And I've had these lines drawn before. So one of the things that we want to see, a break above, comes back, recollects, now starting to get going there. That's what we want to be seeing on plenty of charts. Even, right? Even you know, because you know, we have to talk a little bit about some Tilray brands, right? Well, even stocks like this getting ready to go, guys. This looks like a cup and handle pattern where you have a nice little rounding bottom, comes back, close above the 200 EMA is going to be very important. And on MOS, that's one thing that I put out on our Twitter. If you're not following our Twitter, definitely keep up to get these technical insights. You guys can catch here. What is that purple line? That's a 200-day. The yellow is the 50-day. If the 50-day crosses the 200-day, we get what's called a golden cross. That's usually a turnaround on some stocks. And if you look back, look at the purple line. It hasn't done that since back in 21.
Wow.
When it crossed in a bearish pattern, when the yellow crossed down. So essentially, this has given us an opportunity to finally change tunes.
Love it. Rucifer writes, God, it's making me nervous. Come on, brother. It's Friday. Go in with a happy weekend. Air Wellness. Yes, Marcus Smith. It kicked ass today. Listen, I know we flooded all of our viewers out there with a lot of psychedelic stuff. We usually focus a lot on cannabis. We focus on all these verticals, but wanted to let all you guys know that it was a big announcement today, but a lot of these verticals that we're covering, we feel pretty excited and optimistic about what 2024 presents, and it's kicking off to a fast start. But Mitch, enjoy the weekend, my friend, and we'll check back in with all of you guys on Monday. Enjoy the weekend. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. And if you want to learn more about the emerging industries that we cover, then leave a comment below and let us know who you want us to interview, the questions you want asked, and the information that you want to learn. We want to hear from you. As usual, click on that bell for all notifications to get the latest information. Share this video with your network, and don't forget to subscribe.